Shifting our focus to the Russia-Ukraine war, in which Russia has launched a large-scale aerial assault on Ukraine early Monday, viewers. It targeted multiple regions with waves of missiles and around 479 drones in one of the most extensive attacks in recent weeks. On the other side of the aisle, Ukrainian officials reported strikes across several cities and even claimed to intercept 460 Russian drones. However, the full extent of damage and casualties is still being assessed. The attack, which occurred in the early hours, triggered widespread air raid alerts and also forced thousands of civilians into shelters once again. The scale and intensity of the barrage underscore the continued volatility of the conflict, which has stretched into its third year now. For millions of Ukrainians, the air raids have become a grim and recurring threat. In response to the proximity of the attacks, Ukraine's western neighbor and a NATO member, Poland, also raised its military readiness. In fact, Polish fighter jets were scrambled and air defense systems activated as a precaution. The operational command of Poland's armed forces confirmed that all necessary procedures were in fact carried out to secure the Polish airspace. Poland's swift reaction reflects ongoing regional tensions and also highlights its role as a key NATO buffer along the alliance's eastern flank. However, the main focus Monday remained on the escalating aerial campaign against Ukraine. The attack, viewers, marks another chapter in Russia's sustained use of long-range strikes aimed at pressurizing Ukrainian defenses and infrastructure. This, even as international support for Kiev continues. Well, joining me for more on this story is Allison Fedirka, the Director of Analysis at the Geopolitical Futures straight from Washington, D.C. Allison, my first question to you, what strategic objectives might Russia be pursuing with this latest wave of missiles and drone strikes on Ukraine?
So Russia's objective right here is still related to those peace talks that failed a week ago. What they are trying to show are a couple of things. First, the area that they are attacking is not ones that they have annexed or claimed in the past. This sends the message to Ukraine that if you do not accept our terms for a peace process now, we do intend to take more territory, and in fact more territory that is not included potentially in the terms that we are seeking right now. So that is a major threat to Ukraine. It would take a long time for Russia to execute that, but that's one of the messages. The other message with the drones is related to a U.S. decision to pull back some of the materials needed for their drone defense operations. And that is a reminder to Ukraine that the U.S. has an interest in this war ending as well and wants to pull back some of its support under the current administration that Ukraine previously experienced under the Biden administration. So militarily, the ground situation hasn't changed dramatically. There's been a few advancements of a few hundred meters, but the message to Ukraine is very clear, and it is in response to both the drone attack inside Russia last week as well as the failed peace talks.
Well, Allison, Russia, as we all know, Russia already has control of 5 Ukrainian territories, and they've, in the latest, they've claimed to be attacking Dnipropetrovsk. Now, could this renewed intensity in Russian air attacks signal a shift in their broader war strategy?
So right now, I think the strategy remains fairly consistent with what it has been before. Russia has made several comments in the past that it wants to acquire Ukraine land all the way up to the Dnieper River, and its current ground advancements would be up to that point. And the drone attacks, especially those against infrastructure and critical sites for the Ukrainian war effort, again, speak to the idea of debilitating the Ukrainian armed forces such that they can no longer continue fighting. I think in an ideal world, Russia would love to have all of Ukraine because historically that's been its largest ambition. But under the current global context and knowing what the Western reaction would be should Russia try to make such an attempt, let alone whether it's capable of doing that, is a different story. So right now, I think that the big scale ambitions are fairly similar to where they were at the start of the conflict, with the most ambitious part being up to the Dnieper River, should they ever get that far.
Escalations are very much similar as they were earlier, says Allison. My last question to Allison. Now, we saw Poland scrambling fighter jets earlier this morning. Now, what are the risks of escalation if one of these strikes, one of the Russian strikes, actually accidentally crosses into NATO territory, let's say Poland?
So that is the biggest concern I think that Russia has right now. For 3 years, the country has managed to avoid bringing in direct NATO fighting. They've obviously had a lot of NATO support in Ukraine with weapons, with training and things of that nature, but there's been no direct military confrontation between Russia and NATO. NATO desperately wants to avoid that. Russia desperately wants to avoid that because the balance of power of NATO against Russia is heavily in NATO's favor. So Russia will do everything it can to avoid that accidental escalation. As for the Polish response, they have obviously a military reason for it, as you mentioned in the introduction, of being precautious. Anytime there is some type of conflict in a neighboring country, you want to make sure there is no accidental spillover. There's also a political motivation in terms of mobilizing NATO, incentivizing NATO to come closer together and show stronger support for Ukraine through Poland as well, because there are some members of NATO that are tiring of this conflict and no longer want to keep supporting it as it once did earlier in the war efforts. So it's both a military and political reaction on the Polish side to consolidate NATO support for Ukraine and just general NATO support moving forward.
Well, thank you so much for unpacking that for our viewers, Allison.